Hello again. Today we're going to talk about dependency injection. The material that I'm going to be going over is based in part on Chapter 3 of Practical Object-Oriented Design by Sandy Metz. And you can access this chapter via the library and our O'Reilly Higher Education links. And then also the example I'm going to be using is based upon one by Armando Fox, although I've modified it a fair amount. All right, so let's start with, rather than a definition of dependencies and injection and things like that, let's actually go with an example. All right, and so this is the example that's based upon that by Armando Fox. So our example is basically, we're going to assume, we have a model, user profile, okay? Now, this user profile has in it a birth date. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to be able to write, goal is to add a method birthday to the model that returns true if today is the user's birthday. So the user who has this user profile. Okay, so that's not going to be too hard. So in the simplest sense, that's going to be like, oh, okay, what's the date today? And we can ask the system for that message, that answer, and then we can compare. Is it the same month and day? Hey, it's the person's birthday, and we'll return true, otherwise we'll return false. There's one gotcha here, which is dealing with people who are born on February 29. Okay, so if you're born on the 29th of February, and so it was a leap year, we would like to be able to wish you happy birthday every year. And so in this case, if not a leap year, we'll say your birthday is true on March 1. Okay, because that's, it would be the 28th, and there would be no 29th, and then so on March 1 it would be happy birthday. But that's only if it's not a leap year. Okay, if it is a leap year, there will be the day, the 29th, and we should wish you happy birthday on that day. So we just want to write this method. All right, and so let's go ahead and do this. And this would be written inside of the user profile model. So at the top of the file, we're going to need to require date, because we need access to the date class and its methods. So I'm going to skip over, the material that we need to declare the class and stuff. Inside of it, one of our public methods, we would write, def birthday, and we'd start off and we'd go, let's go fetch today's date. And so we call the date class, and it has on it a class method. That's why we're calling it via the class name today. So let's go get today's date out of the date class, because again, this is like we're running our Rails app and the user's logged in, and we want to ask, oh, is it the user's birthday today? If so, we could put out a message in a view that's like, happy birthday, it's so good to have you with us on your birthday. I don't know, something along those lines. So you go and you proceed. You're going to check to see if the month is equal to, and we'll have inside of the model we will have had a field birthday. And so we'll check to see if their month and day match. So if that's the case, then we go basically, hey, this is great, we're going to return true. Now, so this will handle all those cases. It will also handle the case when it's February 29th. So it happens to be true on February 29th, we'll go ahead and return true. Great. Otherwise, we do need to check about this whole case that, wait a second, is it not a leap year? And let's check out someone's birthday. So else if it's not. So it's great that, by the way, that date objects have on them a leap method that tells us whether or not the year is a leap year or not. So we can say if it's not a leap year, all right, and we have the following scenario that that we have, and the case is that today dot day is equal to 1, and our birth date dot day is equal to the 29th. I'll put in two little ampersands there, and also we're going to double check, we got to check the month, and our month is equal to the 3rd, and we also need to make sure that the person's birth date month happens to be the 2nd. All right, so we've got to check in here that their birth date's on February 29th. We're also checking here if today is March 1st, and it's not a leap year. In this condition, when all those things are true, we're going to wish them a happy birthday as well. Or at least this method's going to return true so that we could do that or whatever else we wanted. All right, return true. Else, we return false. And we end our if statement, and then we end our method. All right, pretty nice. And then the question is raised, how do we test this? And perhaps if we had used test-driven development, we wouldn't have ever written this method this way, by the way. Because the moment you think about testing this thing, you go, oh, wait a second, we have some problems here. Absolutely. So what are some of these problems? Yeah, this guy here. This is not cool. So I run my test, and the day that I run my test on matters. How am I ever going to run the test properly? Oh, I'm doing my tests, and today is February 26th. Okay. I'll make a user profile with a date of the 26th and one without the 26th, and I'll run my tests and we'll see if it works. Woo! And then when tomorrow, when I do my PR and someone runs the tests, everything's broken. So that's not going to work. You might think, okay, well, yeah, what else could I do? What else? Well, it's just not feasible. It's not gonna fly. So you're really kind of stuck. And likewise, are you only allowed to test the leap year portion of this code once every 4 years? And you got to log on a particular day to send in, we can create any user profile's birth date, but everything is tied to what is, I know, we'll go change the system's date. No, you won't. That's insane. You're not going to go change the system's date to manipulate this. So we need a better solution. And so what in the world is our problem? What we say here is that basically what has happened is that our problem that we're faced with is that our user profile model it depends on the date class. There's no way, it's got its name there. So it absolutely does. And this dependency is a real problem. As likewise as these testing of dates is really messy, because we want to have something that we want it to work like this, but how in the world do we test it? And the solution to this is to get rid of the dependency. Okay, and we get rid of the dependency with a technique called dependency injection. So our solution is to remove the dependency via dependency injection. Now this is just a great name. It makes you want to like go around and like, I want to go do some dependency injection. But it's a great name because it sounds cool. It's a horrible name because you're like, what is this supposed to mean? Like, I'm supposed to go get vaccinated for a dependency, get an injection, like what in the world? No. So injection, this basically means that what we need to do is we need to send an object into our class. So we're going to send an object into the class rather than create it or access it from inside of our class without any knowledge about that happening from outside the class. So if you recall, you just go back in the video and you can look at that code again. There's nothing from the outside of that method that says, hi, inside of this method, I'm using the date class. So it's dependent upon it, and it's also hidden that this dependency is inside of this user profile model class that we've made. So what we want to do is instead of being dependent in that fashion, we want to actually send in objects that we want to use, and that will make it very clear what we're actually using, but it also, so we inject it into the class rather than have it built in as part of the class. All right, so let's see what that would look like. Not that hard. So we would go and we would rewrite our our method to be def birthday. And so we need to send in this object to remove the dependency. So we're not going to send in the date as in the whole class. We're not going to send the class in. What we want to do is we want to send in today's date, basically. So we're going to do this so that we're going to make a parameter today, so we can send in this argument here today. Now you're like, oh, this seems a little weird, but look, you could write a little comment up here on top that says this method returns true if the user's birth date is the same as the date passed in. And in fact, if you think about it, this actually makes the method, it's going to make the method a lot more useful, because you could, if you wanted to, if you were like working on a calendar method, you could have checked, oh, I want to check to see if this date is their birth date, and I do that. But it would probably be better actually just to ask what is the birth date and use it in some fashion. And you could do that with the model, but This is nice. This is going to remove the dependency. And so now we don't have that first thing where we ask what today is. We just immediately get in there and we write, if today dot month is equal blah, blah. And the rest, it stays exactly the same. Okay, I'm not going to rewrite it here for you. And so then this ends. Okay, so that's pretty easy. So so now this method only depends upon having an object that responds to the various calls that we were making on that data object. So just to put this concretely, now the method only depends on an object that can respond to calls such as, so we asked it, what was the day, what was the month, and we also asked it whether or not it was a leap year or not. Now what's interesting about this is because of the way Ruby works with what is called duct typing. Duct typing, if you don't recall, is basically, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, all these sorts of things, it is a duck. Now, the idea of that saying is basically, we don't know what the type of this object that gets passed in is. We don't know if it's actually a date object. It could be actually a time object or a date time object for all that we know. But so long, and it could be any object that we wanted to make or create as well. So long as that object responds to a call to day, to month, and to leap, this code in here is not going to know any difference. And we're basically only saying in our usage, we expect whatever you pass in to have an interface that responds to when we call to these messages. When we respond to these methods, all right? You heard me just make a little slip there and I said messages. When you read chapter 3 of Sandy Metz's book, Sandy Metz is going to talk about sending messages to objects. This is one of the ways that people who are deeply into object-oriented programming talk about. When we teach you Java in 121, we talk about calling methods. Okay, so a class has a method and you call that method and it does stuff and returns values and things. In object-oriented programming, in these very pure object-oriented programming languages such as Ruby, the history going back to Smalltalk was to talk about Smalltalk was a language, one of the first, maybe the first object-oriented programming languages, but this notion that you'd have an object and messages are sent to it, and it then responds to that message by sending back an answer or doing something, and that object can send messages to other objects. And so you have this world of objects sending messages and receiving messages. Those messages, these are methods. So to send a message to an object is to call its method. All right, so when you read it, don't get too confused about what all these messages are. It just means, oh, if someone's going to send me a message, it means they called my method. If I want to send a message to someone, it means I'm going to call their method. That's all it means. Anyways, so this is really nice. So we have no notion of what its type is. It just has to respond to these calls on the methods. All right, so now that we've done that, what does it take to test the method? Well, it's really simple, because now we have complete control of being able to control what today's date is. So you could see that you could create some user profile, Oh, my pen is dying. Create some user profile with a given, with a birth date. I'm not going to show you the code to do that. Then all you're going to do is you'd set up in your test, you'd like, oh, I want to test this with a certain date. And so then you're going to be able to, let's say we had it in some, we'll call it a variable user profile just for the heck of it. We're going to call birthday on it. And all we need to do is send in the date that we want to check. And so let's say we wanted to test one of these leap year days. So one of these February 29th, we just go date.new 2020 to 29. It was a leap year in 2020. And so you could then call that, you would capture the results, so arrange, act, and assert, and you'd be able to run your tests on regular birthdays, on leap years, not leap years, all these sorts of things, because we get to send in the date that is today. That's beautiful. Absolutely wonderful. Solves it. It's important when we write our objects that we try not to have them be tightly coupled to other objects. That first version of the birthday method was tightly coupled to the date class. No other class was suitable for telling us what today's date is. There is actually the possibility, and I'm sure there are many classes out there that will tell you what today's date is. Now, I don't know if they'll all tell you whether it's a leap year or not, but again, you could envision that years down the road, a different class is written that you want to use to send in the date because there's something better and fancier now. Well, so long as it has day, month, and leap, there's no problem. Okay? You can still keep using the code and it's still going to work because you have removed that dependency upon a particular class. You're less tightly coupled to other classes, and that object becomes more reusable. It's a win-win all around. Now, there are multiple ways that you can end up being dependent on another class. I'm going to take a definition from Sandy Metz's book. So an object has a dependency when it knows one of the following four things. First one was what we've already seen, which is it knows the name of another class. And so that example there was the birthday method knew the name date, and it expected it to exist. It had to exist, so it was dependent upon it. The rewritten version has no idea that there is such a thing as a date class. Now, in the rewritten ones, though, there's still some dependencies there. And so, for example, it knows the name of a method it calls. It's like, you're like, yeah, how else are we going to find out what today is and what month is or leap? This you'll see when you take a look at Sandy Metz's chapter. She gets into the details of it, but you could have a class that relies upon, let's say, using, let's say, the leap method in many different methods of your own. Now, all of those then are tied to the method name leap ? All right. So what if you wanted to break that dependency or at least reduce it in size? What you could do is you could create your own. You could create, for example, like a private method, and you could, is leap year or something like that, and then you use that method in all of your other methods, and then inside of your method, maybe you call, the leap method. Okay. At least there you can see where the dependency is. You've isolated it, so it's not as bad. But it also means that because you've hidden the call to leap inside of one of your own methods, you could of course change that there, and those other methods wouldn't be any the wiser. So you at least have removed the dependency directly from the writing of those other methods and contained it and encapsulated, sort of hidden it inside of one of your other methods. And there's other possibilities for what you could be doing there as well. 3, you have to know the arguments. Now, the methods that we use, day, month, and leap, don't take any arguments, and so that's not a problem. So it needs to call a method. So if you know a method and if it takes arguments, then you also have to know what those arguments are. And as well, a fourth thing being, in a lot of cases, the arguments are positional, and the order that you put them in matters. And so you have to know what the order of the arguments are as well. And in Sandy's chapter, she gives examples of how to clean these up. In particular, for example, the order of the arguments. If you write your classes using named arguments, which is a feature that you'll see in Ruby, you'll also see it, for example, in the R programming language, which you've used in statistics. It's really nice that you say, oh yeah, this method, when I want you to pass me these arguments, but I'm going to require that you use their names when you pass it. In that way, and then you can put them in any order, because you're explicitly saying, oh yes, I'm passing you this, and I'm passing you this, and I'm passing you this. It's great. Likewise, you can reduce some of this by if you have default values for the arguments. So, oh yeah, I know I need to pass in, this value. Maybe you don't know about the other values you need to pass in, but if there's default values for them, there's no problem. You'll just use the default values. And we actually see this in tons of stuff that we do in Rails. For example, you look at the assert methods for Minitest. They almost all contain with them an optional argument message. And so that you could specialize what the message is when the assertion fails. But most of the time we don't use that. And we didn't, because it has a default, which is it creates its own message. But if we wanted to, we could. And so those sorts of things are one of the ways to break some of the dependencies that exist. Now, I will say though that while you've got 2 through 4, number 1 here, this is the most important one. And when we want to really talk about dependency injection, this is what we really want to, first of all, eliminate and deal with. These other ones, sure, they're true, but I think they're going to be less important to you to deal with most of the time. This though is a huge one, and you run into it all the time. It's far better to pass in the object that you need to use rather than to create it inside your class or call it by name directly. And that way, again, it means you open up your class to using any other class that implements the interface that you needed from that object. And that it just makes things so much more flexible. And certainly what you're going to find is, just as like in this example, it makes things a lot more testable for you. We're going to see later, we're going to be talking about doubles, using them in testing. And very similar idea there is basically rather than using the actual object that a class needs, we're going to create another object that responds to the same methods. It's like a stunt double. It jumps into the place. Anyway, so we'll be able to use it. And it's the same principle. So long as the method that we send in responds to those messages, we're good. All right.